Lieberman. I am the chair of the Honors Council here at Widener, and it is my great honor to welcome you to the Thursday of Student Presentations of Honors Week. Come on in. We'd love to have you inside. We will take all questions for all presentations when everyone's been completed. So without further ado, I want to introduce Megan Hardy, who is a nursing major recommended by Professor Williamson, and she'll be talking about breastfeeding and being baby friendly.
Hello, my name is Megan Hardy. I'm a senior nursing student, and I'm going to be talking about being baby friendly with breastfeeding. I started this project about a year ago during my research class, and I happened to be in my maternity rotation, and my clinical instructor was a lactation consultant. So having had the opportunity to speak with her about the topic, I learned a lot and how extremely important breastfeeding is. Originally with this project, I talked about 3 articles, but for today I'm just going to talk about one of them. So you can see some of the benefits here, not just for the baby, but for the mother. And one of the biggest things about benefits with the baby that I want to point out is breastfeeding, that breast milk increases immunity. So if you have that immunity in that baby, it's fewer illnesses, they're really healthy. And research shows that breastfed babies are healthier than those that are bottom fed, and even those babies that are breastfed that aren't breastfed for as long. And for the mother, you can see that there's a decrease in osteoporosis and even a decreased risk for certain cancers. So clinical issues here. The biggest issue I want to point out is that according to the 2010 Healthy People Goals, these statistics aren't high enough. That's their goal, but breastfeeding rates are still not high enough. And as nurses, we really need to reach out to these new mothers and find ways and certain interventions, whether it be prenatally or postpartum, to really increase, their knowledge, their self-efficacy, and their duration in breastfeeding. 6 months is the minimum for breastfeeding. It's what's recommended, and 12 months is particularly ideal. This map right here is from 2007, and it's showing children who were breastfed at 6 months. The white states there are actually showing mothers less than 30% breastfeeding at 6 months, and the dark blue states are showing mothers who breastfed more than 6 months, and that was only 50%. So that's only 13 states there that are those dark blue. We want to see the entire country dark blue. We really want to get these kids breastfed for more than, a few months. So significance here. This article shows, super baby. That's what we want. So one thing I really want to point out here is that if mothers can increase their self-efficacy and their knowledge, it's going to increase their breastfeeding duration. So if we can increase the duration, we can increase how healthy these babies are, and helping these mothers decrease the risk for those certain diseases and cancers. And the bottom line is we really want healthier babies, and we want super baby, essentially. So a little more about the article itself. The purpose of this particular article was to, again, increase self-efficacy and duration of breastfeeding. And the specific intervention that they used was a 2.5-hour prenatal breastfeeding workshop. And they really wanted to get out, what they wanted to get out of it was, again, the increase in confidence and the length of breastfeeding. And again, if we increase the self-efficacy and their confidence, it's going to increase their duration. And just another little brief description about this particular article. It was first-time mothers. It took place in an Ontario hospital up in Canada. And the population size was a little small, but I'll show you why that's not that big of a deal in this particular case. So here are some of the research designs. I'm not a fan of this particular graph, but just to give you an idea, On here it shows a level 3 quantitative analysis, but it's really like a level 2. And all that means is that it was a randomized controlled trial, which is really a good way to perform research and conduct everything because it really increases the validity and just the reliability of that particular research. And just a little bit of a review of the literature, a few things that I want to point out here was that it was a peer-reviewed article. I put down that the reliability and the validity were a little questionable only because of the population size. It was a random controlled trial, so it was good in that sense. And there wasn't any statistical significance, but the clinical significance was high, and I'll show you why in a minute. As far as how they measured the research, they had this scale that they used that was based off of Bandura's theory of adult learning principles, and they measured the mothers at 24 hours postpartum, and then they had called them at around 4 and 8 weeks postpartum because in this population this appeared to be an early time for weaning, and we wanted to avoid that and kind of find out why that was happening. So what does this all mean? Again, I went over 3 articles, but all of them did agree that we as nurses really need to make an intervention. We need to increase the knowledge of these women. I mean, even the women that have had multiple pregnancies. So I mean, whether we intervene through workshops or we have more lactation consultants, at-home visits after they've had their baby. And one of the articles even talked about cultural sensitivity. So again, with support and knowledge, we can really increase the self-efficacy. And if we do that, it's going to increase duration. So again, we get that healthy mom and that healthy baby, which is our ultimate goal. So again, the significance. The statistical significance was low because of that, the low sample. But again, clinically, the article shows that it made a difference with these women because they were breastfeeding longer, they felt confident, and they were just breastfeeding longer. So for the future, as far as future research, I think that if they were to conduct more studies, I think the sample size definitely needs to be a little larger so that we can see the statistical significance, but and maybe measuring them on a more long-term basis. And then as far as nursing future, implementing it as far as having more consultants, workshops, remaining consistent with these mothers is a big challenge, and to just really educate them because breastfeeding is so important for these little babies that are just coming out. We want them healthy and strong, and same with the moms. I know we're holding questions, but I love that picture. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. Our next presenters will be Amanda Guy and Margaret Carreras, both of whom are biology majors recommended by Professor Widener. They will be speaking on the effects of acclimation temperature on temperature preference and voluntary diving times of Diamondback, Terrapin, Hatchlings.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Maggie.
And we conduct research on the effects of temperature acclimation and water temperature preference and voluntary diving times of Diamondback, Terrapin, Hatchlings. So what is acclimation? Acclimation is the physiological adaptation and responses of an animal by exposure to one or more environmental change. Diamondback terrapins are ectotherms. This means that they do not produce as much internal heat, but instead body temperature depends on the temperature of their environment. Ectotherms can go under acute or chronic responses to environmental temperature change. During acute short-term response to environmental temperature change, the turtle's metabolism, for example, can increase immediately. On the other hand, during chronic long-term response to environmental temperature change, the turtle's metabolism acclimates to a certain rate and state remains that way. For our research, we acclimated the turtle hatchlings for a month prior to the start of the experiment. Diamondback terrapins are the most threatened species of turtles along the Atlantic coastline, and this is mainly due to human impact of their environment. Several conservation efforts do exist to maintain their populations, including a Head Start program at the Widener Institute in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. By understanding the turtles' biological processes, we hope that our research efforts being made will help the Head Start program in Stone Harbor.
We were interested in the effects of temperature acclimation on voluntary dive times and preferred water temperature in Alexandria's Terrapin hatchlings. We examined previous research done on adult dive times and from this designed two experiments that were run in parallel. We developed 4 hypotheses for the 2 experiments. The first experiment was on voluntary dive times. We expected the turtles acclimated to 30 degrees Celsius to sustain shorter dive times, and we expected the turtles acclimated to 25 degrees Celsius to sustain longer dive times in comparison to the turtles acclimated to 30 degrees. We expected, for the second experiment done on water temperature preferences, expected the turtles acclimated to 30 degrees Celsius to prefer warmer water, and the turtles acclimated to 25 degrees Celsius to prefer room temperature water. We obtained 19 one-day-old females from the Wetlands Institute in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, divided these turtles into 2 groups. Each turtle was kept in a Tupperware container with pebbles in each tap water and were given fresh food and water weekly. We kept 10 turtles in an incubator at 30 degrees Celsius, and 9 turtles were kept at room temperature, which was about 24 to 25 degrees Celsius.
Voluntary diving times were assessed by placing each individual turtle into a custom-made small aquarium containing a ramp of pebbles on one side and no pebbles on the other for a minimum of 4 hours. Diving times and frequencies were measured by the average length and number of times each turtle stayed submerged under the 4-hour timing period. In a separate experiment, each turtle was placed into a rectangular, custom-made water temperature gradient apparatus for 4 hours. The apparatus consisted of a plywood box insulated with thick styrofoam bricks. The gradient was divided into 5 sections by metal plates. At each end section, there were 2 deeper wells that contained a copper wire that circulated 30 degrees Celsius water from one end and 10 degrees Celsius from the other. This allowed for heat transfer down the gradient by conduction. The subunits were partially filled with ramps of small stones to enable the turtles to move freely between each well. Before each trial, the temperature of each well was verified using a thermocouple. The graph here shows the average voluntary dive times of the acclimated 25 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius Malaclynus terrapins. As you can see, there was no significant difference in dive times between the 2 groups of turtles.
The gradient data chart shows the turtles preferred the temperatures to which they had been acclimated.
In conclusion, there was no difference observed in the voluntary dive times between the 30 degrees Celsius and the 25 degrees Celsius turtles. This opposed our first hypothesis. On the other hand, the turtles preferred the specific temperature they were acclimated to, supporting our second hypothesis. Our data will be reported to the Widener Institute to help the conversation efforts being made. That is all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Emma Ricciardi, who is an English and creative writing major. She was recommended by Professor Castaldo, and she'll be speaking on gender bias, female homosexuality, and Japanese arts. Emma.
Pull up my presentation, but
As you heard, my name is indeed Ricciardi, and my presentation is called Gender Bias, Female Homosexuality in Japanese Art, but more specifically how it compares to portrayals of male homosexuality in Japanese art. Now, male homosexuality actually has a very long-standing tradition in Japan. For most of its history, they had a practice that they called nanshoku, which is when older men would take on young boys as their apprentices and have a sexual relationship with these young boys. And it happened between like samurais and their boys and priests and their apprentices, so it was an okay thing to do. The comparative term they have, joshoku, instead of meaning woman and woman, actually means man and woman. So they didn't have a discourse to talk about female homosexuality for most of their history. Now the first type of art I looked at is called shunga. It's Japanese erotic prints, which would either be woodblock prints or paintings on scrolls, and they were very popular in the pre-Meiji period, which ran from 1603 to 1867. Now you may notice that the only picture I have is of two men, and that's because I did not want to shock you with pictures of actual sex, because that is all you can find for female homosexuals. Now this particular picture is from a scroll called Spring Pastimes by the artist Miyagawa, and it has multiple pictures on it. This one there's two men kissing, but there are pictures of two men having sex, but they're rather tastefully done. The men are all wearing their clothing and you cannot see their genitals. There are other depictions of male homosexuals where you can see the genitals and they're having sex. But for women, that is the only thing you get in this shunga. They only have very clear sex with genitals being shown, one woman in the male position penetrating another woman. For a long time, this was considered okay because you were all male painters. So it was considered a male fantasy and not something that women actually did. So there was a very large gender difference between the men who could have nice romance and the women who could only have sex for male fantasies. I looked at literature next, which also has a very long tradition for the men. Around the 900s AD, love poems were starting to be written about men in love with other men. This particular book, The Great Mirror of Male Love, was written in 1687, and it contained a bunch of short stories talking about how great it is for men to be in love with men and how they should not be in love with women ever. So for a very long time, there was nothing for female homosexuals to read. It wasn't until Western culture started to permeate Japan that people started to talk about these things. And around the 1920s, in Japan, they had this really great desire for what they called erotic grotesque nonsense. And what's more erotic, grotesque, and nonsensical than lesbians? And that's when they started appearing in literature. The problem with that was they only had two versions of how lesbians could be. One was called dosei, which has the suffix I, which means love, and it was platonic, intense friendship. It was not considered actual relationships, it was a more spiritual, emotional connection. The other was linked directly to sexual deviance, and it split women into two categories, the tachi and the neko. The tachi was the homosexual woman. She would always die by the end of the story and ruin everyone's lives. And the neko was the heterosexual woman who was seduced away from heteronormative activities by the tachi, and would at the end realize, oh, I'm not really homosexual, because that's what happens to them. So the literature was very not good for female homosexuals to read. It wasn't until the 1990s that actual lesbians in Japan started writing their own memoirs that depicted positive experiences, and that commercial magazines started to cater to these groups. Now, if you combine literature and art, you get Japanese manga, graphic novels, or comic books. And there are two genres that deal with homosexuality: boys' love, which is men loving men, and girls' love, which is women loving women. These really started around the 1970s, and one of the very first girls' love manga that you can see on the top left there was written in 1971. And you can see by the picture, it looks a little scary, and that's because it is. It followed this tachi and neko stereotype where the woman in the back seduced the neko away from heterosexuality, died in the end, and ruined everyone's lives. For male homosexuals, they have much more positive portrayals. You can see this book on the right. They're both cops. They look kind of badass. They look like they're having a great time, and they can be in love with each other. So they did have lots of positive portrayals. Nowadays, the female homosexuals do have these positive relationships. The bottom picture on the left is from a modern girls' love manga. You can see they're young, they're in love, they're happy, they've got little hearts around them. So things have gotten a lot better. The problem with both of these genres is the gender roles that everyone is stuck in. Especially in books that deal with sex, there's always a male and a female in the relationship, regardless of the fact they're both of the same gender. And the way these are drawn, they're very clearly indicating who is who. And I'm going to try and use the laser pointer. So for the men, you can see these three taller, older, more mature men with the square jaws. They would be the ones, especially in the sexual acts, to take the male role. Whereas the shorter, younger, and men with the more streamlined chins, they are the one in the female role. The same thing happens in women too. You can see the older, more mature ones Often with shorter hair, they would be in the male role, and while the younger, smaller, more feminine ones would be in the female role. So these heteronormative discourses really do shape how people in Japan read these manga. Another problem with these is that boys love and girls love are specifically genre fiction. If you don't like science fiction, you're not going to go in Barnes & Noble and pick up science fiction books. You're going to pick up whatever you read. So if you don't like boys love and girls love, you're not going to pick that up. What we get instead is mainstream interpretations of female homosexuals. Now on the right here, we have a typical boys manga. It's called Bleach. It's pretty popular. It's still running right now. And this is the lesbian character in that manga. She's hugging her friend. She's used mainly for sexual jokes, and she represents the sexual deviant way that Japan thinks of lesbians. She doesn't have really a chance to have a real relationship, and she's not considered in that way in the show or in the books. So that does not show very healthy female homosexuality. On the left, we also have a different kind. It's from the female side of the equation, so young girl books. The younger small girl here, right there, she is the purported lesbian. She tempers all of her feelings through the fact that she admires her older classmate. So she represents the dosei version of lesbianism. Neither of these portrayals really show them as fully functioning people who can have real relationships. So while boys love and girls love has gone a long way to show positive homosexual relationships in Japan, the mainstream manga still doesn't show them as very positive things. So in conclusion, basically, we need to work a lot harder for the Japanese to have positive depictions of female homosexuality. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter will be Nathan Carbutt. Nathan is a computer information system major. He was recommended by Professor Tuki, and he will be speaking about a book exchange for Widener students.
How's everyone doing? I'm Nathan Carbutt. I'm currently a junior here at Widener, majoring in computer information systems. The title of my presentation today is a book exchange for Widener students. The project was a project for Dr. Hiroki's Management Information Systems Analysis class. We were faced with the task to come up with a system that would be useful for Widener students. So I was in a group with Mike Bergio, Tom DeAngelis, and Eric Oswald. Tom and Eric have since graduated, and Mike is busy with senior projects, so I'm here to present. And the main concept of our system was to make it easier for students to sell or buy books, say at the end of the semester or the beginning of the semester. Some people go to the bookstore, some people use online services, but mainly we want to just make people be able to go straight to each other and kind of cut out the middleman. Maybe even save them money also. The development process. We follow the system's development life cycle, and the beginning of that starts with planning. So we came up with the idea, and in order to see if there would be some interest in this, we conducted interviews. Tom sent out 30 interviews to his friends on Facebook, and 94 said an online exchange program would make it easier for them to use to sell and buy books. 75% said they would consider using our service. 88% said they believed they could save them money. And currently, from the interview, 65% said they use the bookstore, the rest said they use online services. So that led us to believe there was some interest in a system like this. So we continued on with the logical design. Here's our diagram. As you can see, we have 3 processes: the registration process, the credentials process, and the textbooks posted process. The registration process just deals with logging in and out of our system. The other stores is when they log in and out, and last is when it stores all the textbook information. We have 2 text databases. Excuse me, I'm getting busy. We have 2 data stores. One is the credentials. It stores the login and log out information, all the registration information. Other stores the textbook information. These are 2 databases, and all this goes back to the student. Right now I'm going to do a quick demo. As you can see, this is our website that we created to deal with our system. We have some links on the side here and navigational links. So first-time users will go in and register for the site. We have a form here. After you register, you can go back to the home page and log in. You log in with your username and password that you just created. So I created this one previously. So I'll just log in and show some of the features we currently have. So this is our dashboard after you log in. So we have 3 basic services. You can search for books, post books, and manage books. So when you want to search for books, you can go in, and if you click this link, it'll display all the books that are currently uploaded to the website, to the system. And you can also search by title, author, and ISBN if you are looking for something specific. You can also post your own books. So, say you want to sell a book, and you can upload all this, and it goes into our database for others to see. And you can also manage books that you've previously uploaded. This is a book that, this is some information that I previously uploaded. It also gives you the option to delete the book, say if you don't want to sell it anymore. So in conclusion, we learned a lot about the system's development life cycle and what it takes to develop a system. And we learned how to handle data and how to treat it properly and work with databases. We also learned how to develop a website using website design like PHP, HTML, and MySQL, which were all new to us. We discovered that there is considerable amount of interest in the book exchange program for Widener students, and this could be taken forward in the future. That's all I have today. Thank you.
Our next presenters were recommended by Professor Simons. They are Kirsten, Hagen, Alexandria, Patterson, Verda, Peterson, and Christiana, all of whom are psychology majors, and they'll be speaking on Meritorious masterpieces of multicultural psychology.
Good afternoon. Our project is called, as you know, Meritorious Masterpieces of Multicultural Psychology, and I'm Verda Peterson.
I'm Christiana Walker.
And Kirsten Hagen. And I'm Alexandria Patterson. So our first assignment in the class was to do a multicultural observation. I decided to go to a Afghanistan kebab house with my classmate Kirsten. When we first arrived, I was very stereotypical at first. I was wary of it being mostly frequented by people of Middle Eastern descent, and I was wary about the food if I was eating a strange meat that was not typical of Americans. But when we arrived there, the experience quickly changed my mind. I learned that I should keep an open mind about trying new things. The food was delicious, and they did have some meats that I was not used to, but they also had chicken and things that I eat every day, but prepared in culturally significant ways that were very enjoyable. Also, the waiters and the staff there made me feel comfortable. I could not pronounce some of the dishes that were there, and they helped me out, and they made it seem like it was normal and that there was no issue. Also, I found out that patrons of all races visit there. It was not only Middle Eastern, there was of every different race imaginable in there, and they seemed like it was amazing, so it made me want to go back. Also, there was decorations. As you can see, they had rugs and cultural dress. They had instruments on display, and there was paintings on the wall. And also, they had an information table with articles that you can read up about the actual place, Kabul in Afghanistan. So it can help your cultural competency, so you're not as afraid of new things, and it helps educate you.
One of the assignments that we had to complete for our multicultural psychology class was a movie review. Now, this assignment consisted of watching a movie that related to what we were talking about in class and writing a paper on it. The movie that I watched was called Losing Isaiah, which included two mothers of a different racial background that were fighting for custody of a child. The movie related to what we were talking about in class because it involved racism. Now, in the movie, there was one specific case of racism that I found, which is called covert unintentional racism. This is when discriminatory behavior comes about, and it is unintentional, but serves to perpetuate ongoing racist acts and traditions. Now, by watching this movie, I learned that everyone has different prejudices and stereotypes, but it's up to us to watch what we say and to educate ourselves about different cultures so we can break down those negative stereotypes and come together and become better people. The assignment actions were the journal entries. The journal entries were to be done at the end of each week, and we were to answer several questions that were opinionated, that were based on the readings, the class notes, and the class discussions, and they were also based on racism, sexism, classism, and other isms. The questions also correspond with our service learning activity. In service learning, we went into the Chester Upland School District, and we helped the teacher in any capacity that they wanted us to. And through this service learning, we actually gave service to the students, but we also learned from them in many different ways. The questions also were based on our individual thoughts rather than what the class thought. There was an optional question at the end of each section, and the optional question gave you the opportunity to express any questions, comments, or concerns that you had throughout the week that you didn't feel quite comfortable sharing in class. And lastly, the questions repeated over the semester several times to see if our cultural competency changed from, as we learned from our readings and from the class itself, to see if we actually changed from one view to another.
As a part of another project that we did for our multicultural psychology class, we did a multicultural interview. And I interviewed two successful Philadelphia CEOs. The first was Alfred Daniel Hagen III, who's president and CEO of Hagen Construction LLC. And the second is Ann Ewers, CEO and president of the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. And I asked the interviewees about their views on sexism, feminism, and with questions such as why assertiveness is viewed as a positive trait in men, yet as a negative trait in women, and relating to that, how women can successfully climb the corporate ladder. And my hypothesis was that Alfred and Anne would have opposing views on sexism and feminism due to their genders, especially in regards to how women can successfully climb the corporate ladder. And my findings ended up being quite the opposite, as that Alfred and Anne had extremely similar views on how women can successfully climb the corporate ladder. And they both believed that women must be willing to put in the same amount of time and hard work as their male counterparts. But in addition to that, must be able to master the art of tact and supreme diplomacy, and that content is things that we discussed in class that related to gender roles, stereotypes, and sexism. And that concludes our presentation.
We'd like to thank Professor Simons for opening up our eyes to classism,
Racism,
sexism,
and every other kind of ism.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Zachary Ferrara, who's a business major recommended by Professor Saltzman. Zachary will be speaking on recommendations for reducing the federal deficit over a 10-year period.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking to you about a national issue that can seem kind of dry and very strange for many people, but really, I'm going to try and break it down for everyone, and right off, we'll start off the bat with this. And exactly, this is what most people think of when they think of the federal debt. And, you can actually access this, it's the U.S. debt clock. But we're going to focus on one particular aspect right now, and that's the current U.S. debt. As you can see, it's over $15 trillion. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't imagine 15 trillion cupcakes, no matter how hard I try. So we're gonna break this down and just say it's a lot of money, and needless to say, it is continually growing and it shows no signs of stopping. But why does it matter in the first place? What do we even call the federal debt? Because it's kind of one of those buzzwords that we throw around. You know, the federal deficit's growing, we're spending is too much, we're not taking enough tax revenues. But no one really seems to pause and ask what it is in the first place. So generally speaking, the federal deficit is the difference between expenditures, that is what we spend in the government, and the tax revenues that we take in. And this is made up through basically issuances of securities and bonds, which are essentially IOUs. And if you kind of think about this from a personal perspective, it can make a lot more sense. Think about you take out a loan for a car or a house. Now multiply that by about $1 million. All of a sudden, you're in a lot of trouble. You can't pay off $1 million loans on cars and houses. That's why we don't do it. But that is what is happening in the government. We're continually spending, and we're not taking in enough to make a difference. And generally speaking, the negative effects over a long-term period are even more catastrophic because, you know, if that would happen to us, we might declare bankruptcy, we might, you know, have to deal with the creditors, go to court. You know, that happens. But we're looking at this on a national scale. So again, the effects are multiplied infinitely so. And just to kind of list off a couple of the sort of theorized events that can possibly happen, should the federal deficit not be dealt with, we can have less ability by the government to implement fiscal policy, which basically says if we have overrunning inflation or deflation or any sort of inflation out there, we won't be able to handle it as well. That'll be a huge issue because instead of just having a debt, all of a sudden prices are going up, prices are going down, people aren't sure, the whole economy gets screwed up. When creditors come calling, cuts are inevitable because right now we're afforded the luxury of actually being able to figure out what we want to do with the deficit. Do we raise taxes? Do we lower taxes? Do we make cuts here? Do we do adjustments? But if, for example, something were to happen like in Greece, where all of a sudden the creditors, because they are there, and especially internationally, want their money now, well, we don't have a choice. We have to make those cuts. We have to start taking in that revenue that we can pay off. And lastly, we have to pay interest. I mean, that's simple. You know, when you take out a loan, there's always going to be interest on the loan. But all of a sudden, as that interest accrues, we're paying more on our interest than we are on any of the federal programs we have, and that's a huge problem. What's the point on paying an interest for something you paid 10, 20, 30 years ago? So finally, why does it need to be controlled? If I haven't convinced you before, basically it can spiral into a situation where we really do have no control over it. Like I said, we have the luxury of time right now, but we need to act on it before it gets, it becomes a situation where we don't have control. Generally speaking, I'm just going to kind of run through these because there's a lot of numbers, and I feel like the graphs are much more important than the strict numbers. But letting the Bush tax cuts expire, even if we were to keep them only for all but wealthy, is a huge move. We need to let them go because Generally speaking, if we keep them, the government will lose $2.6 trillion in tax revenue, which will hugely overshadow any of the proposals I'll have in the next couple. If we do reform the tax code, however, the government can gain $995 billion, which it's spread out over the entire economy, I guess you could say, where some people will pay less taxes, some people will pay more, but generally speaking, it would benefit more or less everyone because it's fair, it's easier to pay your taxes, and all around, the government gives more money. And of course, though, the problem that we run into is it's easier said than done. Aside from the myriad political issues, there's many loopholes that need to be closed, and these are difficult. They're long-standing issues. Otherwise, though, the big one is Social Security. And what I tended to focus on was the criteria. And essentially, I had to do this research on my own and calculate it. But I used two changes to the criteria. One was age, which if we increase the minimum age for benefits from 66 to 70, we would save about $152 billion. And if we raise the income limit, the taxable income limit, from $110,000 to $150,000, we would increase revenues by about $115 billion. And even only half of that was collected for, again, any of the other reasons listed, tax loopholes, different types of income, anything like that, we would still be collecting $57.5 billion. And like I said before, that was calculated using 2010 census data. And the big focus I had on that was these are adjustments rather than cuts. We tend to always talk about the cuts, the cuts, the cuts. But the way to really minimize macroeconomic impact in a negative sense is to make sure we're adjusting what we do and that we're saving money in that sense rather than just flat out cutting programs because that tends to have the most direct and long-standing impacts. And finally, I threw in early benefits just to acknowledge it. I couldn't find any info on the actual numeric impact, but we can be rest assured that if we do look into it, there will be cuts. I just didn't want to, dispel any, dispel any wrong information. And second to last, Medicare fraud. In an article, the federal government admits that $60 billion is stolen every year. So, Medicare fraud. So if we were actually able to reduce that by only half, 30 billion, multiply that over 10 years, that's $300 billion right away. It would continually be decreased over that time period. And lastly, defense funding. This is sort of the sacred cow for some people, but it is a very large part of our defense funding. It can be ranged from anywhere to 40 to 50% of what we annually spend a year. But if we were to cut the arsenal and not direct personnel, we can save potentially about $624 billion. And that's all the boring number stuff. I just have to get that out there so you know where I'm coming from. This is what I calculated for the changing surplus and deficit. I took the numbers that were projected for spending in 2011 and basically kept things constant and implemented the net changes. And as you can see, it's not a direct impact. It's not over 1 or 2 years that we're all of a sudden going to see the deficit go away, but we will eventually, by about 2019 or so, start to create a surplus. And I'll explain why that's important in a little bit. That leads to the change in the national debt. For, as you see, in a simplistic sense, as we gain a surplus every year, we can start putting that towards paying off the deficit, paying off those interest rates. As we overspend each year, though, we'll only go deeper and deeper into debt. And the big point I wanted to illustrate here is that it's not, like I said, it's not an overnight thing. There is a turning point, but as you can see, it would take over 8 years, which, for all you political science majors out here, that's more than 2 terms for a president. So what we tend to see is, when things don't happen overnight, over 1 term, let alone 2 terms, we all of a sudden want to go the opposite way. But we have to understand that this is a long and progressive change that needs to happen to the economy. If we make any changes, they need to be continuous and they need to be progressive. And I also wanted to just show you this, that generally speaking, if we kept things constant in an economy, that the impact on an increased taxation or a decrease in spending would have a lower impact over time. And this is, of course, due to smaller GDP, which basically, like I said, I just wanted to show because we tend to but politicians tend to get a little scared about taxation. It's going to ruin the economy. No one's going to want to spend, et cetera, et cetera. But as you can see, if we just keep things constant, not even acknowledging a growing economy or changing economy, the impact is lower. We take an initial hit, but over time, if we keep it continuous and progressive, it'll eventually not have as large of an impact each year. And I should have said this before, but if you didn't catch it before, this is all considered over a 10-year period, so any changes will be divided by 10. So, and lastly, because I know you're probably tired of all the numbers, what to take away from this? Because I'm sure it's nice and dandy that I can come here, I can talk to you about the debt, how much it is, how we can change it, but what can we really do about it? And the thing is, talk to your politicians. Tell them what's going on. Tell them that we need to reduce spending, we need to increase tax revenues. Because the way I look at it is, if a freshman business major can come here and show you the turning point for the national debt, $15 trillion, I really think the people we pay and the government to do this for us should be able to do it no problem. There are many, many political issues, but if we look at the numbers like this and we really take a step back and start to look at what it is and how we can change it, it really should be no problem. So, like I said, reasonable and practical steps over radical and impossible measures. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Our final presentation will be by Manisha Vijayasinghe, who is a physics major recommended by Tony Absalom, Professor Absalom, and she'll be speaking on precision sensing in a superluminal active laser gyroscope.
Hi everybody. My name is Manisha Vijayasinghe and I'm a physics major. And the title of my presentation is Hypersensitive Detail Active Laser Gyroscope. This presentation is based on research I started in summer 2011 and have been continuing since. Talking about gyroscopes, many people are not familiar with them. Gyroscopes are a device we use to measure the changes in rotation of a system, and they're used in airplanes, satellites, missile navigation systems. And what we're trying to do here is there are two types of gyroscopes, mechanical and optical, and our research is on optical gyroscopes. And there are two types of optical gyroscopes as well. The first type is the phase-varying gyroscope. A phase-varying gyroscope has two laser beams propagating in opposite directions. And what we're doing is, in a phase-varying gyroscope, it measures changes in rotation by measuring the phase difference between these two laser beams. So, if you look at this image here, you can see this laser beam is propagating clockwise and this one is going counterclockwise. And the gyroscope is rotating counterclockwise as well. So if I talk about the left arm of this laser, when the gyroscope is rotating this way, it's moving against the direction of this clockwise beam. So what happens is when it's moving like that, this beam is going to shorten, which is going to shorten the number of wavelengths in it. So, and also this mirror here will be moving away from this medium, and it's going to cause a Doppler effect, and the laser beam is going to be redshifted. So, this system, or this cavity as we call it, is a positively dispersive medium. So, if you look at this graph here, where we have plotted the index of refraction of the system as a function of the frequency, we can see that as the frequency decreases, the index of refraction decreases as well. So this redshift here, what it's going to do is that it's going to decrease the frequency of this left arm, which is going to decrease the index of refraction. And the wavelength of this left beam is related to the index of diffraction, so the decrease of n, or the index of diffraction, is going to make the wavelength increase, which is going to make the number of wavelengths decrease more and more. So this is going to have a dramatic decrease in wavelength of the left arm. And the exact opposite will be happening in the right arm because the system is moving in the same direction as the right arm. So it's going to have a dramatic increase in the wavelength. So this difference between the wavelengths of these two beams is going to cause a phase difference or a phase shift, and we will measure the phase shift and detect any rotation changes. However, in this gyroscope, the system is rotating except for this medium here and this medium here. So what we're measuring is, since beam is not rotating, it's relative. So I'm going to the second type of gyroscope. It's the frequency varying gyroscope. As I said in class, the frequency varying gyroscope measures the frequency difference between two propagating spins. And this one is going clockwise and the other one's going counterclockwise. However, the difference of the frequency varying is that the entire thing is rotating, including these two media. So, if you look at this image, you can see that the system is rotating counterclockwise, and this beam is going clockwise. So, the system is going against the direction of this beam, which is going to shorten it. So, to keep the system in resonance, the frequency of this beam is going to increase to decrease the wavelength. And this laser cavity or system is in a negatively dispersive medium. So if you look at the plot there, where the index of refraction of the system is plotted as a function of frequency, you can see that as the frequency increases, the index of refraction decreases. So this decrease in index of refraction is going to make the wavelength of this left arm increase. So to keep the system in resonance, the wavelength has to decrease. So to counteract that increase, the frequency is going to increase more and more and more, which is going to be dramatic. And the exact opposite will be happening in the left arm, where the frequency will be decreasing to counteract the wavelength increase. So we are measuring this frequency difference between these two arms, and we can detect any changes in the rotation through that difference. And also the special thing with this gyroscope is that the entire thing is rotating. So what we measure is an absolute rotation. And our research is going to be concentrating on the frequency varying gyroscope. Okay. As I mentioned before, we need a negative dispersive medium to operate this gyroscope. And if you look at this plot here, where we have graph the length of this cavity as a function of the frequency of the laser, you can see that at a critical value of this negative dispersion, there is a large range of frequencies for constant length. And we call this an enhancement of sensitivity. However, a problem occurs even though we enhance the sensitivity. The problem comes with this large range of frequencies. Because the range is so large, the uncertainty associated with these frequencies is going to be very large as well. So, to avoid that error caused by this uncertainty, we are going to move this laser emitter outside the gyroscope system to the inside and convert it into an active gyroscope. And the thing is, when the laser is inside, the laser can change the frequency differences with the rotation, which is going to decrease the uncertainty. Also, going back to negative dispersive medium, we need a negative dispersive medium because it's the base of the sensitive enhancement of this gyroscope. The laser beam, when it's traveling in a negative dispersive medium, is called a superluminal laser because it will be traveling faster than the speed of light in a vacuum. And the laser cavity or the gyroscope system with a superluminal laser traveling in it is called a white light cavity. And these two plots here are results of theoretical calculations which we used to prove our sensitivity enhancement. I'm not going into details on that, but you can ask questions if you have any presentation. Okay, so now we have our sensitivity enhanced gyroscope, this superluminal laser, white light cavity, and everything we need. However, we are going to face a problem at this stage. The problem is that it is impossible to measure the frequency changes of this ring laser using our laser equations because this laser behaves in a very non-analytical way that we can't apply our equations into this laser. So to solve this problem, we are going to use another laser which we are going to apply on the ring laser externally, called the probing laser. The probing laser is going to act on the ring laser, but it's not going to affect its properties at all. However, the probing laser is going to be affected by the ring laser's properties. So instead of measuring changes in the ring laser, we can measure the changes in the probing laser and determine the changes in the ring laser indirectly. This is a special type of laser we introduced to our optical gyroscope. It's called DPAL, which stands for the dye-pumped alkali laser. Dye-pumped alkali laser is very special, first because it's diode pumped, which is very high energy pumping. It can excite a lot of electrons from lower levels to upper levels, creating a very intense, very powerful laser. And also, alkali lasers are created by alkali metals. For example, rubidium we use in this experiment. And alkali metals have a lot of wide upper energy levels and lower energy levels, and they can hold a lot of electrons at once, which is going to create a lot of excitations and generate a lot of photons to a laser beam, which is going to make an intense, powerful laser at the end. Talking about current and future work, we are currently trying to introduce our probing laser to our DPAL gyroscope, the gyroscope with the DPAL laser. And also we are experimenting on homogeneous probing, which is pretty much bringing our gyroscope to the room temperature. And the problem here is that at room temperature, the gyroscope or the atoms of the laser get a lot of kinetic energy and try to travel in almost every direction. So it's going to cause a problem because it's going to affect our frequency shift, and we're experimenting on methods to solve this problem. This research is done in cooperation with Northwestern University and Widener University, Professor Epstein from Widener and Professor Ricciardi from Kirsten, where they did all the experimental work in their high-tech labs, and we used the theoretical work.
We have time for some questions.
The breastfeeding one, I just happen to notice on the slide where you had it divided by states. I don't know if this is part of your presentation, but it seemed like the higher, like the people who breastfed later were all concentrated on like the West Coast and up in the North. Is there any reasoning behind that?
I'm not sure. I did notice that, but I didn't go into detail about why that was, because that wasn't my main focus, but that's actually a really good point. They should definitely look into that.
So to me, like you can put the red and blue states on the something is testable.
Other questions?
I have a question for the psychology team. As you were going through your research, I'd like your perspective on whether you see biases differing like the older generation versus the younger generation. Do you see a change in that? Or?
Well, yes, the younger generation seem to have less biases towards in regards to sexism, homosexuality, and the older generations seem to have more biases.
Other questions?
Any question for the girls?
The turtles. Would you stand up and face your, thank you.
Face your accuser. I didn't catch, maybe you said at the beginning, what was the impetus then? If a turtle dives more, are they going to eat more? Is that why you were exploring the diving patterns of the
We
Mm-hmm.
were looking at their acclimation to a certain temperature, and if a different temperature has a longer dive period, because their metabolism is faster usually when they're in a higher temperature.
Okay, but do we want them to dive more, or we don't?
We were just observing the
Okay.
timing.
But the answer to the question is yes. These turtles only eating water. So actually, that's okay. They can catch the prey on land, but they cannot swallow it. So they have special holes in the throat that when this small, even bigger turtles cannot open up just by respiratory function. So they actually have to swallow water to swallow prey. So yes, they will definitely affect their ability to feed.
I'm going to try that eating underwater.
I have a question for Emma.
findings of a more consistently negative portrayal of female homosexuality versus male homosexuality in Japanese culture. How does that compare across other cultures? Is that similar or dissimilar?
I didn't really do research on this, but it's something that I kind of know a little bit about because you see this type of thing happening in a lot of cultures. For instance, the Greeks have a similar system to Nanshoku that the Japanese had in ancient Greece, where older men would take on young boy apprentices and have sexual relationships with them. And especially with discourses on female sexuality, it's not something that people studied or even accepted for a very long time in most cultures. So this tends to be a trend that happens, but I wouldn't want to say like specific cultures because I haven't actually researched that.
And a question for the guy on balancing the budget. Yeah, I'm interested in your perception of how the inflation or deflation or quantitative easing could contribute to ultimately balancing the budget. We've recently seen deflationary pressures for the first time in a long time, which are truly horrifying. And at QE1 and QE2 with $1 trillion infusions of cash, and we know that our perception of money is based on an element of faith. It's like faith in God.
Yeah.
So we believe that we can buy things with this abstract currency. So if we can infuse $1 trillion into the economy without seeing inflation, then do you see that as a possible solution or part of the solution?
Well, certainly we theoretically could, but as for realistically infusing $1 trillion without an inflation rate, I just couldn't see it possibly happening. And especially since that would probably, it would definitely upset the creditors who all of a sudden, was valued at $20,000. $20,000 is now an infinitesimally smaller amount. But yeah, certainly I do understand where you're coming from, but I think with the constant and especially modern money markets that are going today, the effects of inflationary pressure with the introduction of more currency would just make that feasibly impossible, at least in the current standing.
I have also a question. From a science point of view, I see that the governments don't take facts and making their decisions. Evidence of global warming, but that doesn't influence the decisions. Do you think that the different attitude of fact-based money to make political decisions?
Yeah, I think money's involved.
They will take, in fact, the factual effects of money to make a political decision.
Could you say that's hard?
Yes, I would like to know, you're showing facts.
Yeah.
In time to say, okay, facts should influence decisions.
Yeah.
I know that doesn't happen in science issues. Do you think that will happen in fiscal policy, that actually facts will influence decisions?
That facts will influence the decisions?
Yeah.
I hope so. I think that's all I can say, really, because we have to admit, we're looking at what is ostensibly, numeric problems that are constantly changing, because, like the other gentleman brought up, value of money isn't exactly constant, and we also have to take into consideration that politicians are trying to please the different voter groups. So certainly, I was hoping that by presenting this will kind of spur people to kind of lay on their politicians to not look at the political pressures, but rather look at the financial pressures. But yeah, we can really only hope that they'll listen to the facts.
I will add to that. At least with monetary policy, the Federal Reserve has some degree of independence from the political system. And so you can hope that monetary policy will be based more on facts. In terms of the Q1 and Q2 easing, it cannot have much of an impact if banks do not lend out the funds that the Federal Reserve injects into the system, which is why you're seeing this huge injection without much inflationary issues developing.
Tom, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I have one for Zach.
Not at all. This is good. This is first debate. Anyway, yeah.
Do you think the global economy is in a position where people who are crediting the United States would be in a position to just demand all of their
Well, I think that's part of the reason, because we know we can't pay it off. There's no sense in knocking on the door if no one's going to answer. But certainly, there will come a time that the money does have to be paid off. This isn't something we can infinitely delay. That's why we have to make steps towards it, because if anything, even if they don't demand the money, eventually lending money will be done, and then the same result will essentially happen, where you have a stopping of those loans coming in. The continuous and almost infinite supply that we're seeing right now, has to end eventually.
With regard to the computer science project, the text, just one simple question. Is this already alive? Do you plan to bring it to life? The students use it campus-wide, larger? And one of the slides you mentioned the bookstore. Has the bookstore been modified? Is the bookstore happy to get their task on?
First, I want to start off by saying sorry for freezing up there. I guess my nerves got to me. I was starting getting real hot and stuff.
Good job.
Yeah, that was for it was a project for Dr. Goki's class, and right now it's just kind of like no one really knows about it. So except for the people that were in the class and us who created it, that was the whole idea, like create something that could be used in the future. So if someone wanted to go ahead with it, or the school did, it could work. But also on your point, we never talked to the bookstore about it, so I don't know how they feel about it. But a lot of what people have to say about the bookstore, they go to trade back in their books and get no money for it. So instead of getting little money back for your book that you might have bought brand new, you can just go directly to another person and possibly exchange the books with each other if you feel like it's fair, or you could set up some kind of price or something. I also forgot to mention there's an area for the contact info. Right now it's just kind of open and anyone can see it, but in the future there could be like privacy. So you can see the person's name, their number, their email address, and so it could go forward. It's pretty basic right now, because when we started, none of us had any idea how to create a website. None of us, I think we had just started learning about databases and how to use them properly and everything. So it was all new to us, and it's basic right now. We need to get a little more advanced.
Are you concerned about the prospects for the bookstore if you succeed with this project?
Oh, it definitely hurt them. But I feel like it's a good idea, and it can definitely go forward, and it just needs to be stepped up to the next level. Right now it's just kind of basic, and I feel like in order for it to be a functioning system, well, it's functioning now, but for like a large-scale school-wide thing, it needs to be taken to the next level, and I'm not sure if we were capable of taking it to that level because of we didn't have a lot of experience with this types of stuff.
But your survey results would indicate that there is.
Yeah. Well, it was only 30 people, and I forgot to say only 17 people responded. But I think it might have been like a last-minute type of survey. There were some deadlines and some group members. But from the survey, yeah, it looked like people would be interested. And we also, I didn't mention this survey question. We also had a question about, would you be interested in, say the system were to offer like exchanges for equipment like fridges and like stuff, say you need living off campus, and people also said they would be interested in something like that, and they would possibly think about using it for that types of stuff. Anything else? Yeah, Widener's Craigslist.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to ask Carlos Wilhite to help me distribute the certificates for today. Megan Hardy. Ricciardi. Nathan. Alexandria. Verda. Christiana. Zachary. to our presenters. Thank you for the